Welcome back to Morning Joe. Joining us now, Administrator of the United States Agency for International Development, Samantha Power. Ambassador Power, good morning. It's good to see you. You've been over to the border with Ukraine a couple of times right at the dawn of the war in those early days, and again last weekend with President Biden. You've seen with your own eyes what's happening as more than 4 million refugees stream out of that country. In the course of your diplomatic career, you've been to some very difficult places. Tell us what you saw over there and what America needs to do further here.
Well, you're right that I've traveled twice and so got to see a little bit of the early chaos as people kind of crushed up against the border and had to wait 3-4 days even to get into neighboring countries. Now that system is much better organized. There are people to greet them. They are taken to someone's home. But the inn is filling up, you might say. I mean, people have been so unbelievably generous, opening up their homes, and are starting to run out of room, particularly in the big cities in a country like Poland that has taken 2.5 million Ukrainian refugees so far. So that's one dimension of it, and it's mainly, of course, women and children, as people have heard, and that creates all kinds of new challenges. You know, okay, I want to work. I have a work permit because the EU has been gracious enough to change all the rules and make it possible for people who are fleeing to work and to get benefits. But if I work, what happens to my 3 kids? Because there's no husband, no father to rely upon, no community to fall back on, by and large. So that's for the refugees inside Europe. And then, of course, inside Ukraine, further inside Europe, you might say, the number one issue really is the besieged areas and the fact that President Putin and his forces just are not allowing food, medicine, fuel, and at the same time shelling them to smithereens. I mean, 82 attacks on hospital facilities, more than 500 on educational facilities. And again, that encirclement and that attempt to use civilians and their pain and their starvation to try to extract surrenders. So far, it's not working. But it puts an enormous amount of pressure on political leaders who, of course, want to defend the territory, but at the same time are seeing their people experiencing suffering that we haven't seen, since World War II.
And President Biden, as you know, has rallied the West, whether it's on economic sanctions that have crippled the Russian economy, whether it's getting military equipment into Ukraine to help them fight Russia. What about on the humanitarian side? What does that effort look like from the United States point of view? And what's still out there for us to do there?
Well, I want to stress, again, there's assistance and then there's pressure and policy. So on the assistance front, while President Biden was in Europe, he announced a preparation on the U.S. part to provide $1 billion in humanitarian assistance. We've already expended hundreds of millions to organizations like the World Food Program, UNHCR, and others. But $1 billion is going to be a lot of resources. The key, again, though, is not just how much food do we have, how much medicine is stockpiled. On that score, I think we're in a decent place. The key is how do we get these brutal Russian forces to let that food into people who need it? And that is where diplomatic pressure, the full court press along the lines that we've seen for the sanctions and for the condemnations and for isolating Russia, we now need something comparable where everywhere a Russian official goes, irrespective of who they talk to, whether it's a friend or a partner like China, whether it's a country like India, whether it's Gulf states where a relationship, continues in certain ways, every single one of those phone calls needs to involve someone saying, let the food in, let the medicine in. And so not just a kind of generic global call for that, but specific diplomacy oriented around these besieged areas.
Ambassador Power, I know you spent some time with my brother and also members of the U.S. military who are trying to create an environment for the hundreds of thousands, millions of people amassed at the border. Can you explain what that entails, what you saw?
Well, first of all, let me just say as an American citizen, also an immigrant to this country, how just amazing it is to see your brother, Mark, in action, to have an American ambassador to Poland speaking fluent Polish, talking to officials and families who are hosting Ukrainians in their native tongue. It's the best we can present. It's the best ambassadorial face that we can offer. And I think it's been amazing to see the U.S.-Polish partnership, which has always been strong, but the ways in which it has now manifested in this show of solidarity toward Ukrainians in their greatest hour of need. With regard to the military, they're mainly there, as you know, in a show of assurance and deterrence. And so this is a humanitarian operation that is actually very distinctly and discreetly humanitarian, where anything in the security space is in its own channel, and it's very important that we not mix those. And that's something, again, Ambassador Brzezinski has pushed hard on as well. But, I mean, you see all dimensions of U.S. foreign policy and all dimensions of policy in those frontline states being brought to bear, from the social services and the education to actually needing to be in a position to be sure that there's sufficient readiness, because, of course, Putin has proven himself not exactly acting in the interests of his own people.
Ambassador Power, good morning. It's Jonathan Lemire. Much has been, of course, noted about the ripple effects from this war on the rest of the globe, a lot on energy and energy prices. But there's also growing concerns about a lack of food. Because Ukraine and Russia, the breadbaskets of much of Europe and beyond, how concerned are you about food scarcity? There's some reports that it might be the greatest since World War II. And what can be done about it? Who's going to be impacted and how can we help?
Thanks. Well, first on the state of play, it's grim. I mean, just to give you one example, 85% of Egypt's grains come from Ukraine. 81% of Lebanon's grains come from Ukraine. And this plays itself out all around the world. The head of the IMF, actually, the first week of the invasion said, I thought, something very memorable and important, which is war in Ukraine means hunger in Africa. And we're already seeing that. I've had meetings with people who are in charge of the kinds of innovations or try to get those kind of drought-resistant seeds and that greater crop production going at a faster pace. I have meetings just this week to try to push that agenda. But we also need those countries that have large grain reserves to release those reserves on the global market. It's almost analogous to the debates we have about fuel prices, about who can release more reserves so there's more supply, so the prices go down, because every dollar now is, because the prices are skyrocketing, not only in terms of fuel, not only in terms of fertilizer, but also in terms of the grains themselves. That means that a dollar is going to buy much less when it comes to humanitarian assistance, but also that farmers who used to be able to count on being able to buy X amount of fertilizer can now buy a third of that. And we're already seeing actually riots where farmers are demanding government subsidies to help support them as these prices are spiraling upwards. And so, again, everything's connected to everything else. Global stability turns on a certain amount of food being in the ecosystem. And so we need to look at humanitarian assistance as a stopgap, but we really, again, need more supply on the market, and those of us who do produce, bringing that to bear to try to ameliorate the situation.
Administrator for the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, Samantha Power, thank you so much for being on this morning. I appreciate everything you're doing.
Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.